Hello comrades, it's Comrade Reese here, and today I'm going to be explaining the differences between capitalism and socialism. Now I'm going to try and keep this video as simple as possible because capitalism, socialism and communism are three very misunderstood ideologies. First of all though, I just want to very quickly point out to anybody who doesn't know, socialism and communism are two different ideologies. I will call myself out on this one because before I became a Marxist-Leninist, I used to conflate these two ideologies together a lot. So, for anybody who doesn't know, what communism means is a stateless, classless and moneyless society. This has never been accomplished anywhere in the world yet. So, just point that out to people who claim that communism is a failed system, because all of the so-called communist countries were not communist at all. They are socialist countries. In this video, I will be focusing on three things, and those three things are money, classes, and finally the state. Since I have been asked to talk about both the differences and the similarities between capitalism and socialism, I have picked out these three topics to talk about because under capitalism and also under socialism, there is money, there are classes, and there is a state. Basically, these three things are pretty much the only similarities that you will find between capitalism and socialism. As you have already just found out, there is money under capitalism and also under socialism. But the only real differences with money under capitalism and money under socialism is generally the distribution of the wealth. Under capitalism, the purpose of production is to secure the maximum capitalist profit through the exploitation of the working people. Distribution of the wealth under capitalism takes the form of distributing wealth according to a wage, compensation for labour, or something that has been performed for a capitalist. In other words, the distribution of the wealth under capitalism is for the purpose of enriching the capitalist class. Production under capitalism develops without a planned economy. This means that the growth of production actually runs up against the proletarian condition of the working people. It leads to the reduction of their purchasing power, and this then leads to a crisis of overproduction, a crisis of unemployment, and later the impoverishment of the working people. Karl Marx's theory of alienation can be seen all over the place under capitalism. This is because capitalists frequently want to produce ever more goods and sell ever more goods at an ever lower cost, meaning that workers' wages can get cut. This then means that the workers are not able to buy the products that the capitalist is trying to sell. So essentially, as a worker under capitalism, and it really does not matter if you're a low-paid worker or a high-paid worker, you still work for a capitalist. You are just a cog in the machine who needs to have their stomach filled up every so often, and the condition of your employment is that you basically have to work to create more wealth than what you get paid. To sum it up for you, the capitalist needs you, but you don't need them. You feed the exploiter, they do not feed you. Under socialism, on the other hand, employment is a right that is guaranteed to you. Production develops with a planned economy, as the steady rise in the living standards and of the purchasing power of the working people are a stimulus to increase production, which then secures a guarantee of freedom from a crisis of overproduction, from a crisis of unemployment, and from the impoverishment of the working people. Therefore, production is for the purpose of producing goods that directly meet the needs of the people. Under socialism, there is no wage labour. The exploitation of one person by another is abolished. Labour power is not a commodity, and each worker is paid according to the quality and quantity of their work. The means of production under socialism belong to the working people, in the form of either the state or the collective farms and cooperative unions. Wealth is distributed under socialism according to need, which means that there is a social system set up which gives that wealth to the people. This is the reason why under socialism that things like housing, bills and food are very cheap and affordable to pay for, healthcare and education are free of charge, and luxury items such as fancy shoes are pretty much the only things that are expensive. This is also the reason why that when you compare a socialist country to a capitalist country that both have a similar GDP, the socialist country always has a much better standard of living, and this is purely because of how the wealth in a socialist country is distributed. For instance, if you were to compare North Korea to most countries in Southeast Asia, you will find that North Korea does have a better standard of living. There are quite a few perfect examples of socialism working just like this. The Soviet Union worked like this. North Korea works like this. Cuba works like this. Vietnam used to work like this. Laos used to work like this. And China also used to work like this. Both capitalism and socialism have classes. However, each system has a different class system. Under capitalism, the capitalist class is the ruling class, and due to this, the capitalist class suppress the working class, whereas under socialism, the working class is the ruling class, and the working class suppresses the capitalist class. In the Communist Manifesto, there is a chapter that is very relevant to class struggle, and this chapter is called Bourgeois and Proletariat. The term bourgeois means the capitalist class, and for those who don't know, the capitalist class is that tiny minority of rich parasites who rule over everything, otherwise known as the 1%. The term proletariat means the working class, which is the majority of the population, otherwise known as the 99%. A common argument made by people who support capitalism is that capitalism has brought people out of poverty, and this leaves us with a big question. Has capitalism actually brought people out of poverty? Yes, it has. You're more than likely wondering why. Well, it is because there was a system before capitalism called feudalism. What supporters of the capitalist system fail to understand is that their claim of capitalism bringing people out of poverty does not contradict dialectical materialism. This is because a Marxist perspective of history shows us that as history progresses, people are actually brought out of poverty. Feudalism was overthrown by the capitalist class. Capitalism replaced feudalism. Feudalism was the system that we had before capitalism. Capitalism replaced feudalism with an industrially and a technologically advanced society. Therefore, capitalism has brought people out of poverty, but not because it is superior to socialism or communism, but because capitalism was the next stage in history after feudalism. Capitalism brought people out of the poverty of feudalism, but the industrialization in capitalist countries was not very efficient because it took decades and decades in places like my country or other countries in Western Europe and also in the United States. The industrialization of the capitalist world also involved the exploitation of the working class and the exploitation of the environment, and it did fail to industrialize most of the world. In Russia, capitalism left the country as a semi-feudal society. It wasn't until the capitalist class in Russia was overthrown by the working class and socialism was established that the country was actually industrialized. The industrialization of the Soviet Union was much quicker and much more efficient than the industrialization of any capitalist country. And this was due to the fact that socialism is the next stage of history after capitalism. So the people who were in poverty under capitalism are lifted out of poverty under socialism. But there is a massive difference between capitalism bringing people out of the poverty caused by feudalism and socialism and communism bringing people out of the poverty caused by capitalism. This was because when capitalism brought people out of the poverty of feudalism, it created its own poverty, because under capitalism, the bourgeoisie, or the capitalists, extract surplus value from the proletariat, or the working class. And this is the poverty that we are currently seeing all over the capitalist world today. However, socialism and communism do not replace the poverty caused by capitalism with another poverty caused by socialism, because under socialism and also communism, the workers own the means of production and everything is collectively owned, and because of that, there is no new type of poverty. And this is the reason why just over half of Russia believe that their lives were much better under socialism, because they had a house, They were guaranteed a job, they had healthcare, they had an education and so forth. Cuba's healthcare system achieves population health statistics that go way beyond those of countries like the United States. Socialism and communism do not create their own types of poverty after capitalism, because they are the end of history. You can find a state under both systems. There is a state under capitalism, and there is also a state under socialism. The purpose of a state, and it really does not matter what state it is, the purpose of a state is for one class to suppress another class. For instance, under slavery, the job of the state was to serve the slave masters against the will of the slaves. Under feudalism, the job of the state was to serve the nobles and the lords against the will of the peasants by using knights. Under capitalism, the job of the state is to serve the capitalists against the will of the working class by using the police and the army. Now, the state under capitalism and the capitalist class that uses the state is what Karl Marx called the dictatorship of the bourgeoisie. What we communists want to do to get rid of capitalism is to build a system called socialism, which is basically an organization of armed workers, otherwise known as a workers' state. So the purpose of the state under socialism is to serve the working class and to suppress the capitalists by using their own police and their own military to do so. This is what Karl Marx called the dictatorship of the proletariat. A good example of this was the Soviet state under Lenin and Stalin, the North Korean state, or the Cuban state and so forth. What we communists mean by the term dictatorship is not the dictatorship of one person over everyone, but the dictatorship of one social class over another. Finally, we have communism, which is a stateless society. And what we communists mean by abolishing the state after socialism has defeated the overthrown capitalist class. We don't want to abolish administration, so there will still be things like community policing and so on, but what we mean by abolishing the state is to abolish the state that is controlled by the working class. And the reason for this is because when socialism has defeated the class enemy of the working class, so when the capitalist class has been defeated, the state will pretty much have done its job. It will have no function to perform. And I'm talking now in a hypothetical future, like hundreds, maybe thousands of years in the future. The state wouldn't have to use the police or the military to suppress any uprisings of the overthrown capitalist class, because in order to establish communism, you have to first establish socialism to defeat the capitalists and to actually stop them from coming back to power. And communism has never actually been accomplished yet, because the capitalist class is still at large. There are still capitalist countries in the world. I think about 80% of the world is capitalist right now. You will also find that after socialist revolutions have succeeded, socialist countries get threatened or even attacked by the overthrown capitalist class, both inside the socialist countries and also from the imperialist powers abroad. This is often why socialist revolutions do turn out to be violent. This is often why civil wars do happen either during socialist revolutions or after socialist revolutions, and this is also the reason why imperialist countries throw sanction after sanction at socialist countries. This is not done in the national interest, as you may hear the ruling class in my country claim, but this is actually done against the will of the working class of the imperialist countries to serve the interests of the capitalist class of the imperialist countries. That is why there is so much bullshit in the news about countries like North Korea. Therefore, this is the reason why when the socialist revolution does happen and the working class does come to power, that is the reason why they build a state. Because to completely abolish the state after the revolution would lead to basically fucking carnage, as the capitalists will just find it much easier to come back to power if you go straight into abolishing the state. Anyway, comrades, I hope you liked this video, and I hope you've understood what I've said, and hopefully this video has cleared up some misconceptions that you once had.